At his own daughter's wake, Aaron's grieving son was mistaken for a threat and tased right in front of her memorial. The complaint came from Karen, the HOA president, who had spent years weaponizing neighborhood rules to control and intimidate. But when Aaron started digging, he uncovered a web of lies, forged documents, and abuse of power that would flip the entire community upside down. And just wait until you see how this quiet father turned the tables, and why justice, in the end, didn't just knock, it walked right through the door. Jessica McCarthy died on a Thursday. It was the kind of day that would have made her smile, crisp sunlight, not too hot. The wind barely touched the trees. The sky above was an impossible blue, as if the universe had decided to mock the McCarthys with beauty. She was only 17. Brilliant. Kind. The kind of girl who left notes for strangers and memorized poems for fun. Leukemia had taken her slowly, day by day, piece by piece, until her bones were glass and her laughter only lived in memory. Aaron, her father, had watched her slip away in a hospital bed, hands still wrapped around her mother's. Landon, her older brother, sat curled at the foot of the bed, whispering through tears, "You can rest now, Jess. We've got you." And now they were here, back in East Briar, back in a house that didn't know how to breathe without her. The backyard wake was their attempt at peace. No ceremony, no flowers ordered from catalogs. Just people who loved her, gathered with photos, candles, and shaky voices trying to remember how to say goodbye. Jessica's favorite books sat on a table by the tree she used to climb. A playlist of her favorite songs played low: Nina Simone, Bon Iver, Regina Spektor. Someone brought lemon bars she always asked for. Landon placed her necklace around the neck of the framed photo in the center, and for a while, there was stillness. Until she arrived. Karen Sloan, president of the HOA, keeper of the bylaws, enforcer of the color-coded community code book, and the very last person anyone wanted to see near something sacred. She approached briskly, heels striking the pavement like a metronome of control. A clipboard rested tight against her chest, as if she were about to issue a parking citation in a grocery store lot. Aaron looked up, confusion sharpening into dread. "You're in violation of street parking regulations," Karen said flatly, not even looking toward the memorial table. Her voice was dry, precise, like a knife dipped in vinegar. "Several of these vehicles are parked over the allowed time limit. I'll be reporting this to the board." Aaron stepped forward slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is our daughter's wake. She passed away 2 days ago." He waited. Just waited for something. A flicker of humanity, a pause, a crack in her plastic armor, but Karen only tilted her head slightly and replied, "Rules are rules." And then she turned, heels clicking away, leaving the scent of her perfume and the bitter weight of her intrusion behind. Mallory's hand gripped Aaron's arm. Landon's jaw tightened as he stared at the spot where Karen had stood, as if trying to understand how a person could be that empty inside. No one said a word. They didn't have to. The silence said it all. It happened 20 minutes later. Just as the last sliver of sunlight disappeared behind the tree line, 2 squad cars pulled up at the curb, silent, no sirens, just the flash of red and blue strobes painting the white fences like a crime scene. Aaron stepped out into the yard, confusion already knotting in his chest. No one had called the police, not from his house, not from this gathering. The officers didn't hesitate. They moved fast, purposeful. One scanned the front of the property, another unlatched his holster. "Someone reported a rowdy gathering," one of them said flatly, not making eye contact. "Possible intoxication. Suspicious individuals on private property." Later, the dispatcher logs would confirm it. The complaint had come from Karen Sloan's address. Aaron tried to speak, to explain, but his words were drowned out by the static of the police radios and the crunch of boots on grass. Landon was kneeling by Jessica's urn. He hadn't even noticed the cops yet. His head was down, fingers lightly touching the edge of a photo of him and Jessica when they were kids. He wore a black suit. His eyes were swollen. He was whispering something no one else could hear. A memory, maybe. A goodbye. "Sir, back away from the vehicle," the officer barked. Landon flinched and looked up, startled. His hands instinctively went up, palms out. "What? I live here," he said quickly, blinking against the lights. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't aggressive. It was confusion. A boy, devastated, pulled from his grief into something that didn't make sense. The officer didn't wait. There was a click, a burst, a metallic snap through the air, then screaming. Landon's body seized mid-kneel and slammed onto the lawn. He convulsed, chest arching, hands twisting against the electricity ripping through his nerves. A framed photo of Jessica tipped and hit the ground beside him. Mallory screamed louder than Aaron had ever heard her. He lunged forward instinctively, shouting, "Stop! He's my son! He lives here!" But another officer stepped in, arms out, pushing him back. "He was resisting," someone barked. "He didn't comply." He didn't comply because he was grieving. Aaron tried to reach for Landon, but was held at arm's length, by force, by protocol, by the absurd machinery of power gone blind. The wake was now chaos. Guests backed away in shock. Someone dropped a plate. A child started crying. The music had stopped somewhere in the commotion, leaving only the hum of the police radio and the guttural sobs of a mother watching her surviving child writhe on the grass. And then, across the street on her pristine front porch, stood Karen, arms folded, back straight, watching. No reaction, no expression, just observation, like she was mentally noting a checkbox being ticked. There was no mistaking it. She had made the call. She had known what would come of it. And now how? She was watching the aftermath unfold like it was hers to claim. The ambulance left in silence, its lights cutting through the night like a cruel reminder that grief wasn't finished with the McCarthy family just yet. Landon didn't speak on the way to the hospital. He didn't cry. He didn't even look at his parents, just stared out the window like he was watching the world from the outside, like he no longer belonged to it. The emergency room was sterile, fluorescent, and too bright for the kind of night they were having. Nurses moved quickly, efficiently, but with none of the warmth that broken families hope to find. Landon flinched when they touched him, even when they warned him first. When the EKG pads were removed, they took tiny pieces of his skin with them, and still, he didn't complain. "He's in shock," the nurse told Aaron and Mallory. "Physically, he'll recover, but this kind of trauma, it doesn't just fade." Aaron had heard that tone before. As a father of a dying daughter, he'd learned how to translate medical indifference. It meant, "We don't have anything else to offer you." They brought Landon home just after dawn. He went straight upstairs into Jessica's room. He didn't come back out. For the next 2 days, the house fell into a new kind of silence, one more haunting than the one Jessica's absence had left. This one felt like a vacuum, like it was sucking the air out of every corner. Even the floorboards seemed afraid to creak. Landon refused to eat. He didn't respond when Mallory knocked. He didn't cry. He just lay in her bed, face turned to the wall, fingers tangled in the edge of her old hoodie. At night, he screamed. Twice. Aaron rushed in the first time, heart pounding, only to find Landon sitting up, drenched in sweat, eyes wild and unfocused. I thought they were back," he whispered. "I felt it again." Aaron sat on the floor beside the bed and didn't say a word, because he didn't have any. What words could fix a child who'd been electrocuted in front of his dead sister's memorial? What sentence could make sense of that? By the third day, Mallory looked like she hadn't slept. Her hands shook when she poured coffee. Aaron found her sitting on the edge of the bathtub at one point, just staring at the tiles. And that's when the letter came. Aaron had gone outside to get the mail, not expecting much. A sympathy card, maybe. A bill. Nothing he couldn't handle. But then he saw the envelope, white, crisp, the Eastbriar HOA logo, printed neatly in the corner, his name typed cleanly beneath it. He tore it open, already feeling the blood rise to his face. Notice of violation, Category 4, sent by Karen Sloan, HOA President. Violations include disruptive emotional gatherings beyond approved noise thresholds, excessive and unapproved decorative lawn elements, candles, photos, objects not submitted to HOA Visual Compliance Committee. Please be advised that future violations may result in fines or board action. Aaron read it twice, then a third time because he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. His son had been tased on his own lawn. His daughter's ashes were still in the house. His family had shattered in slow motion over the course of one brutal year. And this woman, this creature in human skin, was filing paperwork about candles. He didn't scream, didn't shout. Instead, he walked slowly out to the backyard, past the tree where Jessica used to sit and read, past the table where her framed photo still stood, past the candle wax that had melted into the soil like it belonged there. He sat down at the fire pit, opened the lighter drawer, and stared at the flame for a long, long moment. Then he crumpled the notice into a tight ball, lit the corner, and dropped it into the pit. The paper hissed, curled, and disappeared into black smoke. And still, Aaron didn't speak. He looked around at his yard, perfectly trimmed grass, all HOA compliant. The same white fence he'd power washed twice last month. The same approved shade of house paint they were required to use, the matching mailbox, the front hedges trimmed exactly 18 inches high per East Briar regulations. They had done everything right. They had followed every rule. And still, his son was lying in bed like a shell. His wife looked like a shadow. His daughter was gone. And Karen Sloan had sent a letter. In that moment, something cracked. Not loudly, not violently, but permanently. Aaron realized they hadn't moved into a community. They'd moved into a machine, one that ground people down into parts, one that dressed cruelty in khaki and called it order. And at the center of it, like a queen on a plastic throne, was Karen Sloan, watching, smiling. Protected by the rules, she twisted like a garrote. But something inside Aaron shifted that day, and it didn't shift back. Something changed in Aaron the day he burned that letter. Not all at once. Not like some cinematic explosion. It was quieter than that, more surgical, like a light turning on in a locked room that had been dark for too long. He stopped grieving, at least outwardly, and started working. He moved through the days with precision. He woke up early, made coffee, sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and a legal pad, the same table where Jessica used to do her math homework, the same chair Landon had fallen asleep in after his first panic attack. Aaron started where all power hides, in the paperwork, HOA bylaws, community guidelines, board member voting records. He requested digital access to meeting minutes under the Community Transparency Clause, a clause Karen herself had bragged about implementing to maintain order and accountability. Order, it turned out, was a very relative concept. What Aaron found went beyond petty. He cataloged it all, line by line, name by name. First, the violations. Over 30 HOA citations issued by Karen in the past 6 months. Every single one was aimed at homes with teenagers or single mothers. Some were for things as absurd as excessive Halloween decor or unsupervised minors sitting on porch railings. Then, the cameras. Karen had a Ring camera installed, but it wasn't angled at her own porch. It faced directly at Aaron's driveway. She had been recording his family for over a year. No signage, no disclosure. A clear violation of both HOA policy and state privacy laws. He dug deeper. A community petition from earlier that year, one that had led to a new parking ordinance, had forged signatures. He called 5 people who were listed. 3 of them had never even seen the document. Then came the financials. Aaron cross-referenced HOA expenditures with county records and noticed something odd. A landscaping company, Cypress Ridge Maintenance LLC, had received over $18,000 in contracts over the past year. Problem was, the owner's name matched Karen's son-in-law, Bradley K. Mason. Bradley, who didn't even own a lawnmower until 6 months ago. Aaron didn't yell, didn't throw anything. He just kept writing. The next day, he made calls. He met with a civil rights attorney in downtown Houston. She listened, took notes, and leaned forward when he showed her the taser incident footage captured on a neighbor's phone. She connected him to another attorney, one with experience in HOA abuse cases. Aaron emailed the documents to both. He didn't stop there. He went to the local news station. Quietly, off camera. Just a man holding a folder asking a journalist to look into something that wasn't just personal, but systemic. He knocked on his neighbors' doors too, the ones who'd been quiet, withdrawn. He asked them questions. Some were hesitant at first, afraid, but a few started talking. One woman, Maria, showed him her own violation letters, 9 of them in 3 months. Another neighbor, Jason, admitted that Karen threatened to fine him for letting his niece park her car in the driveway overnight. By the end of the week, Aaron's dining table was covered in documents, screenshots, statements. And Karen's name was no longer just written on HOA letters. It was now appearing in subject lines of legal emails, filed complaints, press inquiries, requests for comment. 4 different investigations had quietly opened, each from a different direction. Karen didn't know it yet, but the rules she had once twisted like a leash were about to wrap in around her own neck. The fire didn't start with a shout. It started with whispers. A neighbor on the next block, a quiet woman named Jenna, told Aaron one evening that she had also received HOA violations from Karen for having chalk drawings on her sidewalk. Her daughter was 6. Then came Maria, a single mom from Birch Lane who admitted, visibly nervous, that Karen once threatened her with eviction over a plastic playset that wasn't aesthetically compliant. The set was a birthday gift from her late husband. She'd taken it down within 48 hours out of fear. An elderly couple next door, Stan and Lorraine, invited Aaron over for tea. They'd lived in East Briar for over 25 years. Lorraine confessed that for the past 2 years, they'd stopped hosting family dinners. "Too many cars in the driveway," she whispered, eyes down. "Karen said she'd fine us. We didn't want trouble." Aaron listened. He didn't push. He just took notes, names, dates, incidents. The fire was spreading now, not out of chaos, but clarity. The neighborhood had been under Karen's thumb for so long, people forgot what it felt like to stand up. But Aaron reminded them. Word kept moving, street to street, porch to porch. Each conversation added oxygen to the blaze. And Karen? She felt the heat. She tried to fight it the only way she knew how: control. 2 weeks later, she called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse. Officially, it was to address growing misinformation and community unrest. Unofficially, it was a last-ditch attempt to reclaim the narrative. The room was full. 30 residents, folding chairs, neutral-colored walls. The air smelled of lemon-scented floor polish and tension. Karen stood at the front, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She wore her usual beige pantsuit and that tight, artificial smile she reserved for official occasions, like fines and reprimands and staged charity photo ops. She opened with her favorite line, "I believe in order, not emotion. In facts, not hysteria." Aaron stood at the back, holding a file folder thicker than a phone book. He waited, not for permission, but for timing. When Karen tried to discredit the false claims being circulated, he stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked to the projector, plugged in his laptop, and said calmly, "I'd like to share some facts." No one stopped him. On the screen appeared the first document. A list of HOA violations sent exclusively to homes with teenagers or single parents. Most of them women, most of them minorities. All signed by Karen. Then came the photos, her Ring camera footage, dozens of files. All facing the McCarthy's driveway, none facing her own. Unregistered, unapproved, illegal surveillance. The room shifted. Some people leaned forward. Others sat back, arms crossed, stunned. Next came the petition with forged signatures. Aaron showed them scanned copies. 3 neighbors stood and confirmed their names were used without consent. Then came the financials. That's $18,000 in contracts awarded to Karen's son-in-law's fake landscaping company. No real address. No other clients. And finally, he played the audio. The 911 call, dated the night of Jessica's wake. The room went silent. Karen's voice filled the space, flat and measured. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance at 742 Willow Grove. There's a gathering, possibly intoxicated guests. One individual appears emotionally unstable, possibly under the influence. Black male, mid-20s. Aaron paused the clip, then said without looking at Karen, "My son's name is Landon. He's white. He was 19, and he was grieving his sister." Silence. Not just quiet, but a vacuum, like someone had punched the air out of the room. Karen didn't speak. Her mouth was slightly open, her face pale. Her hands gripped the podium, as if she could hold the world still if she just squeezed hard enough. But it was already shifting. People started murmuring. A man in the 3rd row stood up and asked, "Wait, she lied to the police?" A woman turned to her friend and whispered, "She's been watching us too." And Aaron said nothing more. He didn't have to. He packed up his laptop, walked out of the room, and left the fire to burn. Karen was voted out that same night. The motion passed without debate, not a single hand raised in her defense. For the first time, the woman who had ruled the neighborhood with clipped tones and typed warnings stood utterly alone. She didn't argue, didn't speak, just gathered her papers in stiff silence, shoved them into her worn leather folder, and walked out. The door slammed behind her like a gavel, but her fall didn't end there. Aaron and Mallory filed a civil suit 2 days later. Emotional distress, discrimination, and targeted harassment by the HOA and its president. Landon filed his own. His suit named the officer who tased him and the HOA for feeding the false report that led to it. That same week, the police department launched a formal investigation into the responding officers. One was suspended, another removed from field duty. And then the skeletons kept falling out of Karen's closet. Turns out, she held a real estate license, never disclosed, never mentioned, and directly tied to several HOA-backed property sales. The ethics board caught wind. Her license was suspended pending a full investigation. Karen disappeared from public view. Her once perfect lawn grew patchy, paint peeled, dead leaves collected on her porch. Neighbors began to whisper, this time without fear. HOA warnings, identical in tone to the ones she used to send, now showed up on her door, left by a newly appointed interim board. Aaron passed by one morning. He didn't stop, didn't smile, but he noticed the weeds, the silence, the symmetry. Karen had finally broken the same rules she spent years using as weapons, and now the machine she built was chewing her up the way it once chewed everyone else. Irony didn't knock. It slipped in quietly and made itself comfortable. Landon didn't heal all at once. He didn't wake up one morning and decide he was fine. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to come back. The flinching stopped. The silence faded. The tremors eased. At first, it was little things. He started leaving his bedroom door open again. He joined Aaron on short walks in the evening, their footsteps crunching softly along the sidewalk where everything had once gone wrong. He went back to therapy. At first, he sat in silence, arms crossed. But the third session, something shifted. He spoke. Then he wrote. Poetry mostly. Raw. Sparse. Honest. One morning, Aaron came downstairs and found a folded piece of paper on the kitchen table. A poem, handwritten in black ink. The last line had been circled in red. You can't unbury the dead, but you can stop them from being forgotten. Aaron read it twice, then a third time. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the paper back on the table. He didn't say a word when Landon walked in, just nodded once, and Landon nodded back. That was enough. Jessica's room remained untouched for months. No one dared disturb it. Her scent still lingered in the blankets. Her handwriting still marked the calendar on the wall, a world frozen in place. But Mallory had an idea, something quiet, something right. They transformed the space into a reading room for neighborhood kids. They left her books exactly as they were. Beanbags replaced her bed. The walls stayed the same, covered in photos and quotes Jessica loved. They added a sign to the door, Jess's library. Leave a book. Take a story. On Saturday afternoons, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the hall. On quiet nights, Aaron would play Jessica's old video diaries on a loop, just soft enough to hear her voice floating down the stairs. She would talk about books, about hope, about the stars. The house no longer felt like a grave. It felt like something living again. The McCarthys had taken their grief, not erased it, not ignored it, but shaped it into something sacred. They didn't rebuild the life they lost. They built something new around its memory. And in that space, for the first time in a long time, they could finally breathe. The courtroom was quiet, sterile. No drama, just truth waiting to be spoken. Karen sat at the defense table, rigid and unreadable. She didn't speak, not once. Her attorney did all the talking, framing the case as a regrettable misunderstanding and a misinterpretation of HOA protocol. But facts don't bend for excuses. Aaron's team presented everything. Clean, sharp, undeniable. The racialized 911 call. The surveillance footage aimed not at Karen's own porch, but the McCarthys. The pattern of selective enforcement. The forged petition. The money trail leading straight to her son-in-law. And the testimonies. Neighbor after neighbor. People who had been silenced for years finally allowed to speak. The judge took it all in. No emotion. Just steady note-taking and the occasional pointed glance toward Karen. Then came the sentence. You weaponized your position, the judge said. You created fear under the mask of order, and you forgot what community actually means. Karen was ordered to pay restitution to the McCarthy family, cover legal fees, and remain under a restraining order, permanently barred from serving on any HOA board. She left without a word. Aaron didn't smile. He didn't need to. Justice had been served. Not loudly, not violently, but fully. 1 year later, Aaron stood on the front lawn of his home and watched a moving truck back into the driveway across the street. Karen's house. But it didn't feel like hers anymore. The windows had been repainted, the shutters replaced. A chalkboard sign hung by the porch reading, "Home Sweet Home," drawn in messy but joyful kid handwriting. A family of 5 now lived there. 2 boys, 1 girl, and a Labrador that barked excitedly as Landon helped carry boxes up the walkway. Mallory brought over a tray of cookies, wrapped in a yellow towel, the same one Jessica used to take to the beach. Laughter echoed through the cul-de-sac. Real laughter, the kind that had been missing for too long. Aaron didn't feel triumph. He felt stillness. A local reporter, standing on the sidewalk for a follow-up story, asked him what justice had felt like. Aaron thought for a moment, then said softly, "It's not about revenge. It's about the next family not being afraid to grieve. It's about knowing that we didn't stay silent, that we protected our kids, even when the world tried to pretend they didn't matter." The reporter scribbled the quote. Aaron didn't wait for more questions. He turned slowly toward the big oak tree in their backyard, the one where Jessica's memorial still stood. Sunlight hit her photo just right. Her smile, forever 17, seemed to catch the light. She was still gone. The ache would never leave completely. But something had changed. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't sharp or suffocating. It was full of meaning now, full of presence. Jessica was at peace. And so, finally, were they?